Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Thursday afternoon briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to discuss all the latest from Easter Road as we build into the return of competitive action all the way up in Elgin on Saturday. But first of all, we're just going to take a wee bit of time to just reflect on the pre-season training camp from last week over in the Netherlands. Patrick was there providing you all the interview content that you could possibly wish for. Sorry about that, folks. Things are falling over in my flat here. But yeah, as I said, Patrick now back with us here in sunny Scotland. So you were right in the thick of it, obviously, for the best part of a week. 2 friendlies, training sessions, lots of sit downs with players, managers. What were your kind of main takeaways from the week, really?
I think the main one was just how kind of positive the atmosphere seemed to be. I think it's difficult when the team's struggling like they were last season for results, points, league placings. It is always going to feel a little bit kind of strained at the best of times, and that's before you move on to anything that's going on in the background or whatever. But certainly like a very positive feeling, very kind of relaxed, very just a kind of sense of togetherness. Not really any cliques. It was always sort of like, I mean, obviously you get the players splintering off into little groups, for like playing cards or stuff like that. But for the most part, just very, very, very sort of much a team who are together going into the start of the new season, which is really what you want when you've got a new head coach. Even though Dave Gray obviously has been there for some time, it is a bit of a fresh start. You've got some players getting a kind of clean slate, and I just think like a really good mood in the camp. Literally, a lot of hard work. I mean, triple sessions on some days. And some very tired players by the sort of Thursday, Friday, but it's all in the name of fitness, and you have to be able to hit the ground running. I've lost count of how many games we've seen in the Premier Sports Cup group stages where teams that arguably should be strolling to results based on the gap in divisions or whatever are getting a fright from lower league teams. I mean, it's happened to Hibs, famously with Falkirk, to a lesser extent Morton, although obviously there was a whole load of background to that as well. And I just think it's been, David Gray's been consistent in his messaging from the very beginning that the season doesn't start on August the 4th at St Mirren, it starts on July the 13th at Elgin. And I think that's not a bad, it's not a bad sort of mantra to have, if you like, because we've seen what happens when Hibs don't treat the group stages of the League Cup as seriously as they maybe should.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously, there's pressure on Gray himself to get off to a good start. He'll be aware of that as a bit of a rookie head coach, that he needs to get results on the board early doors, and performances to go with it. So I think it was a useful week in the Dutch countryside. Not a lot of distractions for footballers or journalists, if I'm honest. But I think a lot of hard work, a lot of team building, a lot of bonding going on, and you can see in the games that they played against Duisburg in midweek and then Pauk at the weekend that it does seem to be having an effect. I know they're just pre-season friendlies. I know you can't sort of take anything from what are effectively bounce games, but yeah, I think overall, a useful week, and yeah, I think probably reasons to be cheerful going into Saturday's game. I think that Gray will have an idea of the best team to pick in terms of starting 11 and subs who can come on, to get a result. And I mean, I'm sure we can discuss that later, but I think he'll have seen enough to let him know what his sort of strongest 11 is at this moment in time, whilst also being aware that until the end of the transfer window there will be the chance to add to it, where the club sees fit.
Yeah, and I suppose before new signings come in, it's a chance for guys to stake their own claim. Guys who have perhaps haven't been involved so much, have been on the fringes, have been out on loan. There was quite a few faces in there who didn't either didn't play at all, or guys who kind of limited game time for various reasons. And obviously you got to sit down with one of them, which was Luke Amos. Obviously arrived in January, but just couldn't really get going at all, could he? Injuries. Obviously the fact as well that he's trying to pick up match sharpness, but there was even last season, there was a lot of players kind of competing for places in the middle of the park. So, I mean, he didn't really hold back in terms of how he, in terms of his, how would you say, his verdict on his own personal campaign last season, calling it a disaster, which is, pretty much in his mind, he's probably thinking that has gone as bad or as poorly, sorry, as it was possible to. So, I mean, he's one that's obviously comes with decent pedigree. He's played at a good level down in the Championship. He's kind of come through, kind of the top level of youth football in England as well. Kind of well regarded as a good player who's just needed a bit of luck in terms of being able to stay fit. So I think he is, for me. I don't know what you think. He seems to be, for me, he's one of the ones that I'm most interested to see if he can start pulling it together. And he certainly feels, it came across in the interview, that he feels that he's got a bit of a point to prove, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah, and I think he probably feels that sort of on more than one front, if you like, because obviously, he feels he has to prove himself after that injury that kept him out for I think the best part of a year, and he's also got a new set of fans to kind of impress, because any player will be aware that if you come to a new club, whatever fanfare there is around your signing, and obviously, as you say, his pedigree coming through the ranks at Spurs, and then playing a decent number of games for QPR in the Championship, big things are expected of you, and then to suffer another injury and then you can't sort of participate in anything for about 8 weeks. And you've also got the background of the manager who signs you is eventually relieved of his duties. You've then got another head coach who you're trying to not necessarily impress, because as David Gray keeps saying, he's been in the building, so he knows the strengths and weaknesses of the players on the books. So there's not that sort of period of having to get to know the players. He knows most of them, which is helpful. He'll know obviously what Amos can do and what he's maybe what he maybe needs to work on, but you don't often hear footballers being quite so kind of forthright like that when they're talking about. I mean, obviously you get the usual kind of cliches about like, oh, that's football, these things happen. And to be fair, there was a little bit of that from Luke when we were speaking, but I think just recognizing that things probably couldn't really have got much worse for him. Not being able to go to Dubai because he wasn't fit enough, getting the move done, on the bench against Rangers for his first game after, sort of crossing his fingers that the contract and everything, all the paperwork could be done in time for him to be on the bench. And then, plays a handful of games and then he's got an injury that keeps him out again. And I think, watching him in the games, he obviously played at Edinburgh City, he played against Duisburg, he came on against PAOK. And, I think you can see a player there who probably brings to the midfield something that Hibs have been missing for a while. He describes himself as kind of like all action number 8, and I think there's people who are thinking, oh, is he a defensive midfielder? What is he? So I think, like you, I'm intrigued to see. I'm intrigued to see what he does in this team. I think, obviously Nick Montgomery did end his time at Hibs playing what was effectively a 4-2-3-1, which it looks like David Gray is going to continue with, but maybe a slightly different approach in terms of who plays where. We saw Amos play more as a kind of number 10 against Edinburgh City, did it again against PAOK, and you don't want to really have players out of position if you can help it, which as we'll discuss later, was kind of a theme of the pre-season trip just because of numbers. But I think if Gray can get the best out of Amos, find his best position, and he can maintain his fitness, then I think he could end up being a really shrewd signing. It's people talk about like the midfield in any team needing a certain type of, or a collection of a certain type of players. Like you've got to have somebody who's like a destroyer, you've got to have somebody who's a playmaker, you've got to have somebody who's box to box. But if you can get a collection of players who can play together, who can sort of complement each other, then I don't think you really need to have sort of the exact profiles that I've just mentioned. I think if the players can cover those roles, like David Gray talking about Josh Campbell saying, you kind of use him as a 10, but not a kind of typical 10. He sees him as being a little bit different. And, I think it's the same with the other midfielders that, it's maybe not having the sort of classic profiles that you would have had, 15, 20 years ago. But, if they can all complement each other, if they contribute, and obviously different combinations will work in different games against different opponents, then it's a problem that's kind of plagued Hibs for a while as the midfield. But I think I think from the sort of limited evidence we saw in pre-season, it does look like, it's not the finished article. I'd say, there's maybe, maybe the possibility for bringing in a different type of midfielder to complement the ones that are there. But in the meantime, for the League Cup games, I think what they've got at the moment should be more than enough, or more than capable, if you like, of, not even being a match for, but just being able to sort of deal with these games in a straightforward manner, and not sort of get overrun and not struggle against teams that they really really should be beating.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think with the amount of options, just the sheer numbers, and that it's probably difficult to add any more unless you ship at least one or two out at this point. I mean, I completely agree. I think it should be enough in there to navigate these League Cup fixtures. I think going forward, longer term, even if there was one concern I had, it's maybe just a lack of a sort of out and out creative midfielder, and amongst all that. Again, we're kind of intrigued to see the sort of role that Josh Campbell's given as to whether he can step up and fulfil that. But that obviously kind of remains to be seen at the moment. So I think for me, if there was going to be any sort of midfield change or addition, I think you would ideally, I think somebody who's a bit more of a creative presence would probably bring you a really nice balance in terms of different profiles. But again, on that front, we don't know at the moment. There's still plenty of time left in the summer, I suppose, and that could change once pieces start moving on and off of the board. Not to stray too far away from the training camp, though, before we move on to this weekend, just to touch on the friendly against PAOK. I mean, again, you don't want to read too much into this, but it was interesting to see David Gray putting into practice what he'd spoken about in terms of that he wants his team to be adaptable, and he sort of did that with a change of system. A game that against a quality opponent where Hibs were friendly, you're going to have to suffer a wee bit. So I mean, what did you make of the game? I mean, it was good to get another clean sheet, I suppose, for Hibs. That's 3 out of 3 in pre-season. Another victory as well. But what do you think we can sort of glean from that going forward?
I think the main takeaway was that Hibs did not play particularly well, didn't have that many chances, and were under the cosh a little bit, but somehow still got the win and a clean sheet. And, if that's a Scottish Premiership game against Celtic, Rangers, Hearts, Aberdeen, anyone, then you would take that. Because that's one of the things that Hibs have not been great at recently is playing badly but still getting the result. Like generally, it seems to be play well, don't get the result; play badly, get an even worse result. I don't think we need to dwell on that too much. We've been there before. We did videos about it last season. This is the all new kind of everything's rosy-ish approach. But all joking aside, I think that there was a bit of a kind of steeliness to Hibs that I hadn't quite seen for a while, and I think that is the David Gray effect. I think that. He said this after the Motherwell game, the 3-0 victory towards the end of the season, that number one on his kind of list of priorities, even as the interim manager, was just like make the team harder to beat. And I think when you look at the signings they brought in Warren O'Hora, Marvin Ekpiteta, those two big centre halves who have captained their previous teams, complement each other really well. You've got O'Hora, who's more of a kind of ball playing centre half, and Ekpiteta, who's more of a kind of if it moves, kick it or head it kind of approach. And it's you look at a team like PAOK, Greek champions. Obviously, again, it's a pre-season friendly, but some good quality players in there, and Hibs dealt very well with them. And what was noticeable was that the different kind of personnel dealt with them in the same way. So there was a host of changes in the second half. It wasn't sort of 1-11 for the first half, 1-11 for the second half, but there was a point where they made like a host of changes all at the same time. You had things like Rory Whittaker at left wing back. You had Kanayo Megwa playing left-sided centre half. And then moving to right wing back as other changes were made. So you had a sort of almost constantly shuffling back five who all dealt well, all sort of faced up well to a team whose reputation kind of precedes it, and managed to keep a clean sheet. And there was a couple of good saves from Joe Bursick in the first half. Jojo Wallacott had one in the second half to keep, to sort of preserve the clean sheet, if you like. And the main thing for me was just how Hibs did not. It wasn't a case of Hibs had sort of won a hard. I mean, it was a hard fought game, but it was very kind of one way
Yeah.
traffic for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Pauk. I mean, they scored an offside goal. I'm trying to remember if they hit the woodwork or not. I feel like they maybe did. But it was a little bit kind of one way traffic at times. Hibs were under the cosh, but somehow escaped and won the game and kept a clean sheet. And that's sort of a really positive sign is preseason friendly or not, whether it was Pauk's second string team or whether it was a mixture or whatever. It's it's good to see them playing a game like that. It's a very different kind of task from playing Edinburgh City or playing Duisburg, and essentially got the same result, which is a clean sheet and the win. And I just think for Gray to change it up, to play a different formation, to ask players to play out of position, to play differently, to deal with a different type of opponent, and still get the result. That's kind of what matters, because as managers keep telling us, it is a results business, and you can play really well and get beaten 2-1, or you can play really badly and win 1-0. Like, people are going to remember the latter. They're going to remember the games you win rather than the games you lose. And I just think that's the sort of performance and the sort of result that could be hugely crucial to Hibs this season. If they can eke out a few results like that they haven't been able to get over the line in previous seasons, then as well as I do, it comes to the end of the season, those sort of points, extra points, if you like, can make a big difference to top six, Europe, whatever. And I think as well, when you look at cups and the fact that Hibs will want to go deep in both domestic cup competitions, having that sort of flexibility, having that ability to play a different game depending on the opponent and still come out with the same result, a win, is going to be sort of hugely important to them.
Yeah. I mean, the kind of point there about extra points is so kind of pertinent, thinking about last season, wasn't it? Because the amount that were just hemorrhaged almost by, I know we've been over this a million times, but it was going to be imperative for whoever took the job really to come in and make their absolute number one priority is to make the team harder to beat, and then they can say, right, we've sorted that, we can now build on that with everything else. Whereas last season it was the opposite way around, wasn't it? I mean, scoring goals were never really a great issue, and I think even without additions to the team, I think it still should be one that scores goals. I'm not saying there's not going to be any more additions to the team. You would hope and expect that there's going to be, but I think it is kind of encouraging to hear that even though it is pre-season friendlies, that at least seems to be a real kind of concerted effort to make this Hibs team harder to beat, because it was just so evident last season and so costly that was the primary issue. So
it was also the way I think it was also the way that teams knew how they were going to play, and that just made it much easier. So if teams are coming up against Hibs this season, they think, well, could be a 4-2-3-1, could be a 3-5-2, could be a 5-4-1. It's just sort of I mean, David Gray said this at the training camp. He said the work that Hibs are doing scouting other teams, they're doing the same to Hibs. And I think, reading between the lines, he thinks it'd be nice if an opposition analyst was able to sort of issue a big sort of a sort of big booklet rather than just a small scrap of paper that says get to the byline and cross the ball in and watch havoc ensue. It's just kind of what we saw happen a lot last season. And I think I think there's a lot going on in David Gray's head in terms of how to make Hibs harder to beat, how to make them more competitive, and things like that. But it's he's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't feel like it's sort of everything happening all at once. I think it's just get the basics right and then build from there. And so far I think that does seem to be working quite well. And I think we'll learn more about this team under David Gray on Saturday when they play Elgin. Elgin have played 4 pre-season friendlies, all against Highland League teams, 4 wins out of 4, and they've played Bucky Thistle, who obviously performed really well last season in cup competitions in the Highland League itself, and so it'll be a different test, but I think it will be interesting to see sort of how the approach differs for what's actually a competitive game, even if David Gray did say there's no such thing as friendlies after the Pauk game. So that that in itself, I think, is a good message to send to the fans and the players that it doesn't matter if this is a bounce game and we're making 12 substitutions throughout the game. It's the same the same process as if it was a competitive game at home, away, in the cup, the league, whatever. And I think it's just little things like that do sort of give you optimism that a corner has been turned in terms of how this Hibs team is going to approach these games and be harder to beat and just not a soft touch, if you like.
Yeah, and just a final point in terms of what you raised there about not being so predictable for opposition teams. Just maybe for those that didn't get to catch the friendly at the weekend, we've talked a lot about the shape out of possession, how Hibs defended, but like with the ball, did you notice a kind of significant departure from last season? Was it more direct? Was there still an emphasis on trying to build, or was it maybe a bit more varied?
More varied. I think there's probably I don't think David Gray said it is unveiling that he doesn't like philosophies, and he makes this big thing about being flexible. Certainly, getting the ball from the defensive third to the attacking third is happening a lot quicker. Not every time, like sometimes it does call for it to be slower, but it's less laborious than it has been. There's more of a kind of focus on just sort of playing quicker. Like, they're still playing out from the back a little bit, but it's not sort of, it's not sort of like the be all and end all. It's not sort of like this is the one way that we're going to play and this is how we have to play. And it's, to me, it's been quite clear in watching the friendly games that, the tactics are kind of tweaked depending on who's playing. And I think that's, that obviously makes sense. So, for instance, against PAOK, you had two forwards. You had Martin Boyle and Dylan Venti. So there was a lot of ball to feet, trying to get Boyle in, in behind, using his pace against the defence, which he did to good effect. That's how he scored the goal. And obviously, it's that pressing as well. But it's there's maybe elements of what we saw last season. There's elements of what we saw the previous season. But it does look like the build up is quicker and it is more varied. And I just think like it's not going to be so straightforward as just thinking, right, well, if we, if an opposition team says, right, we're going to play this way, and that'll just stifle Hibs because they don't have a plan B. Like if an opposition team comes to Easter Road and does that, then Hibs will have a plan B and a plan C, to get around that. And I think that's something that's been missing, and something that David Gray has been very kind of adamant is going to be a feature of his Hibs team. That if it's not working, then it's the coaching staff's job to sort of help the players, whether that's through substitutions or tactical changes, to get around it and to get a result, which I suspect will be music to the ears of many Hibs fans after last season.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out on Saturday, because obviously you'd imagine it'll be a very different game to against PAOK. Hibs are going to have a lot of the ball, and I suppose we could maybe, be able to see those. Maybe you're talking about the ball getting forward a lot quicker. We'll maybe be able to see those kind of stylistic differences and see how it's going to pan out against teams that are going to sit in against Hibs. Because I suppose the last comparable game to this one coming on Saturday was probably Forfar in the Scottish Cup back in January, and that was a real slog of an afternoon.
It was,
and there wasn't. And you talk about there, it was it didn't really work for a lot of the day, and then there wasn't a great hint of plan B, plan C, which you even need in these games that you are outright expected to win and win comfortably. I mean, sometimes it's not just as simple as rolling up, deploying your preferred style of play and coming away with a result. So it needs to be flexible against all games. I don't think it's just a case of when David Gray talks about being flexible, it's it's easy to just assume that he's thinking, just against the likes of Celtic and Rangers, just against teams where you're not going to have the ball. So I think it'd probably be right to expect to see that adaptability and flexibility that he's talking about against kind of all sides, rather than just the the games where you're not going to have as much of the ball. So I suppose it'll be interesting to see how that pans out on Saturday. But I think just the main thing that any fan that's heading up north on Saturday, I think they're just hoping to see a Hibs victory to kick things off, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's, I'm sure there'll be messages to the players where it's, go out and play your game, show what you can do, but at the same time, it's, get in, get the 3 points, back down the road, job done. I think it just, it's like I was saying earlier, it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's not about, implementing this new style of football. It's it's just about getting the basics right and doing it well. And I think it sounds a bit simplistic, but I honestly think that's kind of what we've been missing. Watching Hibs, we've talked about it till we're green in the face, about what they could do, what they could be doing, and we look at it from our point of view and think, well, why would you not play this? Like last season's a perfect example. The 4-2-3-1 was there, had the players to play it, and then I'm not going to criticize Nick Montgomery for coming in with an idea of how he wanted Hibs to play and an identity, because it was clear there wasn't anything like that before he came in.
Yeah.
But I do think that it might have ended up being a better season for Hibs if there had been that shift to the 4-2-3-1 a little bit earlier. And I'm not going to get into a big debate about was it actually a 4-4-2? Oh well, it was only a 4-4-2 in name because blah blah blah. We don't need to do that. It obviously,
have we not done that before? No.
Once or twice.
Once or twice, maybe.
I mean, all joking aside, the sort of 4-4-2 debate. I mean, it quite clearly it irked Monty at times. He was very, I think it was mentioned in some press conferences, and he never really snapped back, but there was a little bit. He was quite terse about it, and it was like, well, formations are flexible, all this stuff. But all joking aside, I think you could see watching it. It's like you've got the players to play 4-2-3-1. You don't really have the players to be playing this sort of hybrid, flexible 4-4-2 thing. And that's when you start seeing this sort of like 4-4-1-1, where you've kind of got Josh Campbell playing as a false nine or an auxiliary centre forward, whatever you want to call it. Football dads are getting absolutely irate with this now. It's just that sort of like you're watching it thinking it's right there. Like why is there not this? We obviously don't know the inner workings of Nick Montgomery's mind, and you can understand why he sort of said like this sort of served me well with Central Coast Mariners. If we stick at it, we will get there. I can understand that line of thinking, but it was clear when Hibs started playing the 4-2-3-1, and to be fair, they made signings in the January transfer window that allowed that they did for a while. There was sort of like better performances, better results, and I've completely forgotten where I was going with this point, but I think the main thing to this is what happened. You talk about last season, and it sends you crazy.
Yeah, it's like muscle memory, isn't it?
It really is. I've just been transported back to a cold stadium in November, talking about another defeat and no shots on target. But no, I think as you say, it's not just about we're playing Celtic or Rangers, let's play this way from David Gray. For him, it's going to be how can we get 3 points, or how can we get a win out of every game, and what can we as the coaching staff do to sort of try and kind of force that, help it along. And he's made a big thing about players being able to kind of play dual positions. And we saw that a lot in pre-season, almost out of necessity more than anything else, because you look at that team and you think there's like 8 or 9 midfielders in there. You've got 4 right backs, 1 left back, 1.5 centre forwards. Ellie Yuan's a half centre forward, by the way, because we all know he plays better out wide. And there was a sort of necessity to kind of put players maybe out of position. But the promising thing was that it never really looked like they were struggling. So even when you've got players playing alien roles like Kanao Megwa at left wing back, or I mean, it's not really an alien position, but Chris Cadden playing wide right, which he's not done for a while. Lewis Miller playing centre back, which he's not done for a while. It's things like that. But if the players are still able to play their normal game in those positions, even if it's not maybe their sort of preferred position, their most comfortable position, if it still works, then that's the main thing. And I think that's sort of one of the kind of main sort of reasons for optimism. I think is that there will be a plan B, there will be alternatives, and it's not just going to be rigid. And we're going to keep playing this way because this is the way we want to play. It'll be we'll play whatever way gives us the best chance of getting a result. And it does sound very simple. It does, but sometimes the simple things are all you need, and the simple things are what works best. So,
yeah, well,
it doesn't need to be overcomplicated.
Yeah, well, they do say football is a simple game at the end of the day. So, I mean, I feel like we've got, through the couple of friendlies, through being at the training camp, we've got a sort of fairly, still modest at this point, idea of what David Gray is looking to do, what his ideas are. I suppose Saturday will be the first proper step to seeing if that can be transferred onto the pitch. So I think for now, though, we're going to leave it there until Saturday. We'll be through in Elgin for the first group stage game of the Premier Sports Cup. Press conference day at HTC tomorrow, so you'll be able to hear from the manager and one of the players on our website throughout the day. If you're heading through to Elgin, safe journey, folks, and thank you for joining us. As always, we do appreciate it if you're able to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel. That helps us keep growing and bringing you these videos or this video content, so we do appreciate that. So again, thank you very much for joining us. It's much appreciated, and we'll catch you again very, very soon. Cheers.